Today I'm going to be speaking about coercive control, and this is a form of abuse that is subtle yet strategic and involves ongoing oppression of the victim, terrorizing the victim in small and subtle ways. Often the victim doesn't even realize it's happening. It's terrorizing the victim slowly in a way that's normalizing the abuse. And then one day the victim wakes up and realizes, I'm a hostage, I'm trapped. And this type of abuse can be present in intimate partner relationships, family dynamics, targeting situations, workplace dynamics that are toxic, unhealthy friendships, in a variety of settings. But today I'm going to be predominantly focusing on coercive control that's present in an intimate partner relationship, and I'll try to tie in connections to other dynamics like family abuse or targeting situations. And I speak predominantly from the perspective of when I was a young mother and wife in my 20s. I was deep in a relationship where this type of abuse was present, and I was naive to it, and I had no words to even identify what I was experiencing, and I was so isolated that I couldn't have communicated what was happening even if I had the words to describe it. And my hope in speaking on this topic is to have the right person come across this video that might be living in this horrible dynamic, or be able to prevent from getting deeper in it by being able to identify those patterns and recognize and go, oh, this is what I'm living, this is what I'm experiencing, and be able to give words to this type of abuse, because I wish so much I would have known then what I know now. I could have protected myself a lot more. And the word pernicious is a perfect word, in my opinion, when you describe coercive control, because pernicious means, harmful effect, but gradual, subtle. And that's what coercive control is this gradual, subtle, strategic chipping away at the identity, the autonomy, the self-worth of the victim in a way that the victim doesn't even realize it's happening. And often in a targeting situation, our targeting experience is, a chipping away of normalcy. The way people treat us is suddenly different. We're noticing odd things, odd patterns, strange behavior, and it happens in such a way that we don't realize at first, oh, I'm being gang stalked, I'm being targeted. We just recognize all these small things that are happening, and that's much like what a person in an abusive relationship that's experiencing coercive control will experience. It's small things that you start to see things are off, but you can't see the big picture because it's so subtle and it's so gradual. And isolation is a key component in all forms of abuse. All forms of abuse require isolation of the victim, because without a support system, it becomes much easier to abuse a victim, and that victim is not going to have support to share and express what they're experiencing, and they're also not going to receive feedback. If a victim doesn't have friendships and isn't allowed to have outside relationships, they're not going to have somebody that says, hey, I noticed your partner is really disrespectful in the way they speak to you. They're not going to have that feedback, or they're not going to see other couples that are functioning in a healthy way and go, gosh, my relationship's much different than that. And in a coercively controlling relationship, often the abuser will attack the family bonds of their victim and say things like, your family doesn't love you, they make fun of you, they don't even like you, and try to get the victim to doubt that their friends, their family, anybody actually even cares about them. And the goal is to make the victim believe that they're just lucky to have the abuser tolerate them, that they're not worthy of relationships, nobody cares about them but the abuser, and to rely on that abuser as their sole connection. And in a smear campaign, isolation is a key component, because they certainly can't have a targeted individual out in public, functioning, healthy, going to work and carrying on like a normal person, because that would negate the fabricated story, all the lies that have been told by the gang stalkers, the targeters. So abuse becomes much more possible when a victim is isolated. And often in a coercively controlling relationship, the victim will be made to feel guilty if they have any relationship outside of their abuser. Why do you need a friend? Why would you spend time with your friends when you could spend time with me? And be made to feel bad if they have any other kind of connection or give any kind of time or attention to anybody but that primary abuser. Monitoring of daily activity is a big factor in coercive control. And in a relationship, this could involve surveillance within the home so that the abuser can monitor every move and moment of the victim, much like a targeting situation where they put recording devices in our homes and our targeters know where we're at, what we're doing, online activity. They know our every move, and it's that same level of control as an abuser that's exerting coercive control. And monitoring the daily activity can involve frequent calls or texts to check in and, what are you doing now? Well, we just talked an hour ago. Just that need for regulation and control of the victim to feel like they have a good grip on their every move. No right to privacy. So again, in a targeting situation, the right to not having your devices hacked, your email hacked, being recorded and followed and all that fun stuff. Your rights are disregarded. You're treated like you're not entitled to have any of those rights, much like in an abusive, coercively controlling relationship dynamic. That right to privacy could be violated by a partner that changes the victim's passwords to their own email account or their own devices to where only the abuser can log in. If the victim wants to check their email or get into their phone, they have to rely on their abuser to give them access, to give them permission to do so. This could involve listening in on calls, same with hackers and targeting situations. An abusive partner, will listen in on the line and want to hear everything the victim's saying, control who they talk to. I know in my situation, I was really discouraged from having contact with my family, and scriptural reference would be used to support that. Well, we're married now, you need to leave and cleave, you shouldn't be talking to your family, and would try to limit my access to talk to them on the phone. I'd already been moved to a different state by my abuser to be isolated, and then was further controlled in my ability to communicate with them. And I noticed every time I would try to talk to my family on my phone, my abuser would disappear to the crawl space. And I thought, that's really weird that he always goes to the crawl space when I try to talk to my grandma. And one day I went down there and I noticed he had a phone down there and he was listening in on all my calls. And often if they would say things to me like, oh, we'll buy tickets for you and the kids to come visit, the line would suddenly be cut and he would disconnect or pull the landline cord out of the wall if he didn't like how that conversation was going. So this could even involve things like the victim's not allowed to shut the bathroom door when they're, getting ready in the morning. They're not allowed to have basic dignities and privacy in that type of a relationship. I also experienced this with journaling. My journal would be read. So if I wrote down feelings or expressed myself in a way that my abuser didn't agree with, it would create a fight and I would be in trouble. So I learned very quickly that it wasn't safe to keep a journal of my own feelings and experiences because my right to privacy would be continually violated in that way. And in a targeting situation, that right to privacy is violated, much more amplified, which is really unfortunate because often targeted individuals have already experienced this type of abuse in a relationship or a family dynamic, and then to be re-victimized but on a much larger scale and have their privacy rights once again violated is so damaging to a victim. Put downs and criticism are a huge part of this. A victim can't do anything right. Their physical appearance is attacked, the way they walk, talk, the way they cook, they clean, parent, everything is constantly criticized. And much like a smear campaign, the goal is to strip the victim of any feelings of self-worth, that everything about you is wrong. we're spreading this new narrative about your character that's terrible. Everything about you is terrible and nothing good's going to be said about you. And the goal is to destabilize the victim, to make them feel like they have no self-worth, that they're valueless. And then the victim is more accepting of abuse, more accepting of that mistreatment, and less likely to put up a fight, defend themselves, stand up for themselves once they've been broken down and chiseled away so much that their self-worth is next to non-existent in this type of abuse. Over-enforced gender roles are a big part of this. And, as a young wife, I was happy with being a submissive wife and being agreeable and domestic and taking care of the kids and the home, and I loved it, and I had no problem with that. But it was overly enforced. So I go to work during the day. I don't cook, I don't clean, I don't change diapers, I don't take care of the kids. That's your job. You're the woman. And I remember one time all three of my kids, they were young in age and close in age. So I had three babies at once, and they all got the flu. And my daughter had thrown up in her hair, and I was trying to change her bedding and give her a bath and get her cleaned up. And then the baby started crying from all the commotion. And so I had asked my partner, can you get the baby? I'm trying to wash vomit out of one kid's hair. And he wouldn't do that. He made it clear that, no, I have to work tomorrow and I need my sleep, and this isn't my responsibility. You're the woman and you need to get this handled. So those over-enforced gender roles can be healthy, and I'm not opposed to traditional roles whatsoever, but there has to be some kind of balance. And even if I was gone out of town, my abuser couldn't make himself a sandwich. It was expected that I would have all his meals prepared and ready for him. And even if I was, in the hospital for an injury, the expectation was that was still my responsibility. I better figure it out. Limited access to money. So often in these abusive relationships, the victim's not on the bank accounts, they're not in the house, they're not in the cars, they're not allowed access to any funds. Even if they have a job and they earn, they're not allowed to have control of that money. The abuser takes control of all of it, and the victim often doesn't have any knowledge about the finances. And I was in a position where I would have to ask for an allowance to buy groceries, to buy diapers, and I was required to get the grocery weekly ad and figure out every item I needed and how much it cost down to the cent and tally it all up so I knew exactly how much to ask for. I'd spend a couple hours figuring out my list and cutting coupons so that I could ask for the correct amount of allowance. Very controlling. And, limited access to things that the victim needs. I remember during pregnancy, I would really need maternity clothes. I'd outgrow my clothes, and I wasn't allowed any kind of money to purchase that. And so I'd be wearing my jeans, but unbuttoned with a rubber band to stretch them out and hold them on. And I'd always have, rubber band marks on my stomach, and it hurt and they'd snap, and it was awful. But it was, again, just denial of those basic needs, those primary human needs. A victim isn't allowed to have that control of the money to be able to meet their needs or their own children's needs. And in a targeting situation, this is the attack on the financial stability, the attacks on the jobs to try and get a victim fired, damaging their property. So they're expending resources on repairs. Same type of control, coercive control when it comes to financial stability. And you'll see it in a family dynamic, not giving access to resources and withholding in that type of dynamic as well. Denial of autonomy. So if the victim wants to have friends or spend time doing something for self, like exercising or self-care, they're made to feel like they're being selfish. They're guilted for that. I really wanted to go to college. That was really important to me, to get a college degree, and my abuser was not in support of that. And I would spend hours working on a paper, an assignment for class, and then he would rip it up. It was back in the day, I only had a typewriter. or it was time for class and the car keys would suddenly be missing and I would miss class. He'd refuse to watch the kids so I could go to class even though he was going to be home. I had to find a babysitter, but he wouldn't allot me money to pay the babysitter. So it was just obstacle after obstacle put in my way because he didn't understand the purpose of why I would need an education and didn't support that. Control over health and body. So often abusers will want to control the whole physical body of their victim, what they wear, how they do their hair, whether they're allowed to have access to medical care. If a victim is allowed to go to the doctor, the abuser will often sit in the room and monitor to make sure the victim doesn't say anything that the abuser is not comfortable with. The victim could have been assaulted by the abuser and have a broken bone or need stitches, and that abuser will deny them access to medical care. And this control over health and body can extend into our targeting situations where our HIPAA records, privacy rights are violated, or our medical records are altered, or our physician or mental health clinician are contacted and wrongful input is given to them, or fake testimony from fraudulent doctors or clinicians are provided in hidden court cases. All kinds of violations of health and body in targeting situations, as well as attacks on our safety of our health and body when there's attempts to physically harm us. Damage of sentimental items is a big thing. So anything that's special to the victim, something that's meaningful, will be accidentally destroyed or go missing, a way to assert that control, to punish the victim. I know if my family sent me a birthday card or a birthday package, often it would never arrive, or my abuser would read it first and he would decide if I was allowed to have it. And he would be resentful of anything that I was given, and it would always end up missing or destroyed. I could never have any personal property. Or if I did a craft or created something, it would suddenly be ruined. And it was just a way of being mean and making sure that I didn't feel like I had any sense of autonomy or anything that was mine, my own possessions, my own belongings. Turning the kids against the victim. This is a big one. So when a victim leaves an abuser, parental alienation is often very common in these dynamics, but that alienation begins long before the victim leaves, because that abusive partner will demean and criticize the parent in front of the children and normalize that. So the kids grow up thinking it's okay to treat this parent less than, to be overly critical of them, to put them down, to call them names. And unfortunately, that follows even after the relationship ends and actually gets amplified in that alienation effort, in a custody battle, and even into adulthood. Those kids are made to see things as black and white. You choose one parent or the other, and if you show any kind of love or kindness to this parent, you're being disloyal to me. And unfortunately, that is one of the huge damaging factors in these situations, is even though I left the relationship when my kids were very young in hopes of protecting them, it didn't protect them from the way they would grow up, where it was okay to be disrespectful to me and hear negative things about me and be bad-mouthed by my children and have that be normalized. And it was interesting because one of the main reasons I left that marriage was because my 2-year-old son was starting to call me the same name, the derogatory name that his dad called me, and was learning that behavior. And I was so concerned he was going to grow up and be abusive, and I just wanted him out of that dynamic. And then we had a difference of parenting style. I didn't believe in spanking, especially babies in diapers that are acting age appropriate. 2-year-olds throw tantrums, and you teach them how to express their feelings and respond in an appropriate way. It's a teaching moment. But my abuser was very quick to spank, and I was very quick to protect and defend against that. And so I left because I didn't want that to be occurring. And the irony is that that narrative would be flipped later on, and all of his behavior would be projected onto me, and I would be accused of being the abusive parent. And that he left because I wanted to sow my wild oats, when the truth was I filed for divorce. I got a restraining order. I was getting out of there to protect my kids. And it was used against me that, oh, I was the alienating parent because I was trying to keep my kids and me safe. So that projection, that flipping of the script is often a big part of our story. And our abuser will often have numerous ex-wives that will be, leaving because they're trying to protect their kids. But in every instance, in every divorce, they'll say, well, it was because they just, she was a moralist woman that wanted to sow her wild oats and didn't want to be a wife and didn't want to be a mother. When the reality is all of us left because all of the wives left because we weren't in agreement with parenting styles and the abuse that was occurring. A rewriting of history, a rewriting of the narrative, a common tactic in coercively controlling situations. Threats to pets and children are a big one. So if you have a beloved pet, that abuser is going to be rough or violent or threat to harm that pet to assert their control, make sure the victim knows they're in power. And in targeting situations, unfortunately, our pets are very much in danger. There's efforts to do harm to them by our gang stalkers. And unfortunately, some targeted individuals have had loss of pet. Their lives have been taken by their gang stalkers. And it's, again, another form of coercive control to break down that victim. And, there'll be threats of, if you leave me, I'll take the kids, I'll kidnap them, and you'll never see them again. So the victim is afraid to leave, afraid to tell anyone what's going on, or, fear that they're going to hurt the kids if they don't comply or if they're not agreeable. Jealousy accusations are a big part of it. So if a victim puts on lip gloss or tries to look nice, dress nice, or do their hair, they're shamed for it. Well, oh, who are you getting dressed up for? Are you cheating? And, put down for any kind of effort to take care of self, any self-care. Jealousy, if you have a friend, why are you talking to them? You can talk to me about it. Or, why do you need to talk to your family? You have me. Kind of, it's put your sole focus. I'm the sole center of attention as the abuser. No one else can have your time or your attention. And if you give that in any kind of relationship other than them, even your job, you're doing something wrong in a coercively controlling relationship. And last but not least, the abuser is always right. Even when they're wrong, they're always right. And a victim learns very quickly it's best to just be agreeable, to not voice any kind of indifference to your abuser, because they'll be hell to pay. And unfortunately, what happens is, as the victim repetitively is walking on eggshells and avoiding conflict and trying to keep harmony and peace to keep that abuser happy. I know in my situation, when my abuser came home from work, he wanted dinner ready and he didn't want to hear the kids. He wanted to be able to watch TV and not have noise, not have disruption. So it was very stressful. As the end of day would approach, I'd get so anxious. I have to have everything perfect. The house needs to be spotless. Dinner needs to be ready. And I've got to figure out how to keep, young children quiet and out of his way. And it was just such a horrific way to live, but it became normalized from that, gradual, subtle oppression. And it was seen as, well, I'm the provider. This is how I should be treated. I should be treated like the king of my home. I'm always right. And if you disagree with that, you're wrong. There's the door. And after a while, a victim's opinions, feelings, views, insights, identity, instincts are all stripped away, chiseled away, because they're silenced and stifled and kept in so many ways of their life. They're isolated. They're not allowed to have feelings. They're not allowed to have privacy. They're not allowed to have feelings. And unfortunately, a victim that comes out of this type of situation has to do a lot of healing and rediscover who they are. What are my interests? How do I view things? What are my feelings on this? What is my perspective? Because so much of that has been stifled in order to keep the peace. And I just hope in sharing this information, I know it can be triggering to those who've been through it. even in preparation for this, it was reminding me of things that I went through decades ago that I'm still like, wow, I can't believe I survived that. But my hope is that the right person will view this and it could be helpful and preventative and help give words to this horrific pattern of abuse, this coercive control, whether it's in a relationship, a family dynamic, a targeting situation. And the sad part is, in a targeting situation, more often than not, the victim has already endured this type of abuse, many types of abuse in their relationships, in their family of origin. And then it's amplified in a gang stalking situation, in a targeting situation on a much larger scale. And often their primary abuser that initially abused them in this way, whether it's family or an ex, is involved in that and is involved in the projection and the fake narrative and twisting and contorting how things went down in that relationship and telling a new version, a new story, and then furthering that support of the smear campaign and the abuse. And sadly, a victim relives this trauma, but on a much larger scale as a result of that, while their original abuser is puppeteering and calling the shots so that a larger community will abuse the victim in the same way.